we are, Saturday Night Live again. I mean, what am I going to do? I mean, I did this show in the 70s, I did it in the 80s, I did it in the 90s, and now I'm doing it in whatever you call this decade. I mean, think.
Come on, Mick, come on, you can do this, right?
After 6 decades together, you might assume the bond between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, rock and roll's Glimmer Twins, is unbreakable. Forged in childhood and cemented by global stardom, their love-hate partnership has survived drugs, creative differences, and the crushing weight of fame. But the truth is that friendship almost didn't survive 1968. At the peak of their creative power, a betrayal occurred that was so deep and personal, it planted a seed of bitterness that would fester for over 40 years. The queen of the counterculture. To understand the betrayal, you have to first understand the woman at its center. Anita Pallenberg was not, as history might simplify, just a girlfriend. She was, in many ways, the soul of the band. A German-Italian model and actress, Pallenberg was an it girl of the 1960s, a force of nature who was arguably more sophisticated and worldly than the young musicians she fell in with. She wasn't a passive groupie, she was an alpha who, as her son Marlon would later say, enjoyed her power over men. Her first entry into the Stones' orbit was through the band's founder, Brian Jones. Their relationship was notoriously toxic and violent, a whirlwind of passion and abuse. The band watched, unnerved, as their bandmate unraveled. Then came the fateful trip to Morocco in 1967. Keith Richards, who had been quietly watching the destructive relationship, saw Jones assault Pallenberg. In a moment that would redefine the band's internal power structure, Keith, quote, pulled her away, put her in his car, and drove her back to England, where she promptly moved in with him. This act effectively ended Brian Jones's reign in the band he created and cemented the new ruling dynasty, Keith and Anita. Their bond was profound. Pallenberg became Keith's true partner and muse. She was the Valkyrie who shook Richards out of his shy persona, famously encouraging him to wear her own flamboyant clothes, feathered vests, scarves, and chokers, which in turn created his iconic rock star look. She was an artistic partner, even getting credit for prompting Jagger to remix tracks on Beggar's Banquet. They were rock's ultimate Bonnie and Clyde. Keith was completely and utterly devoted. Years later, he described the intensity of that early romance. Quote, "I was bursting in love. Anita is in a lot of those songs. She's a muse, I'm sure, and not just for me." But this intense bond, the very foundation of Keith's life, was about to be tested in the most public and painful way imaginable. In 1968, Mick Jagger decided to launch his acting career, and he had the perfect co-star in mind, his best friend's girlfriend. The Psychosexual Lab. The film was Performance, a dark counterculture art film designed to become a cult classic. Jagger was cast as Turner, a washed-up, reclusive rock star, and director Donald Cammell convinced the producers to cast Anita Pallenberg as Ferber, his bohemian lover. The plot fittingly involved a mind-bending exploration of identity and sexual fluidity, with Jagger and Pallenberg's characters living in a hallucinatory ménage-à-trois. What happened next wasn't an accident. The film set was a deliberately engineered pressure cooker. Donald Cammell, who was himself a former lover of Pallenberg's, was described by one person on set as a Class A voyeur. He was determined to break down every barrier between art and reality, encouraging a psychosexual atmosphere to capture the truth on camera. The set was a seething cauldron of drugs, mind games, and incestuous sexual relationships. Jagger, a novice actor, was isolated in the house with the far more experienced Pallenberg, their roles requiring them to be in bed together for much of the shoot. The atmosphere was so toxic that both Keith and Jagger's own girlfriend, Marianne Faithfull, knew to stay away. But rumors began to leak from the set. The on-screen sex scenes were uncomfortably realistic. Crew members whispered that the lines between performance and reality had not just blurred, but been erased entirely. The rumor, which would soon become legend, was that Jagger and Pallenberg were having real sex on camera. Little did anyone know, Cammell was not just filming a movie, he was stress-testing the internal loyalties of the Rolling Stones for his own artistic gain. Marianne Faithfull, watching from the sidelines, described the production with chilling accuracy. Quote, "A psychosexual lab, a seething cauldron of diabolical ingredients, drugs, incestuous sexual relationships, role reversals, art and life all whipped together into a bitch's brew." The rumors were bad enough, but the reality more complicated, and for Keith Richards, infinitely more painful. The Betrayal and the Masterpiece. The truth was, the rumors were true. It was no longer a secret. Band associate Ian Stewart, who was present on set, later confirmed that Jagger and Pallenberg were in fact having sex. Other reports claim Pallenberg herself admitted to her circle that she and Jagger had consummated the film's threesome scene for real. This is the moment the love-hate relationship between Jagger and Richards was truly cemented. Keith's reaction was not that of a cool, detached rock star. He was consumed by jealousy, paranoia, and rage. He would reportedly drive to the film set at Powys Square, sit outside in his car fuming, a wounded king locked out of his own castle, while mutual acquaintances let him know what was happening inside. This was the ultimate violation. It wasn't just that his partner was cheating, it was that she was cheating with his best friend. The betrayal cut to the very core of the band's hierarchy and his own sense of self. His paranoia became so deep that when Pallenberg gave birth to a daughter in 1972, he held a lingering suspicion that Jagger was the father. But what happened next would turn this private agony into rock and roll legend. Keith didn't just get mad, he got creative. Tormented by apocalyptic visions of the affair, he picked up a guitar. He channeled all of that personal, nightmarish rage into his music. The result was Gimme Shelter. This is the dark magic of the Rolling Stones. The song, often seen as an anthem for the end of the 60s, was, at its root, a desperate plea from a man in torment. Quote, the phantasmagorical visions of war, flood, and rape were a direct reflection of his inner state. The song, as one critic so perfectly noted, quote, doesn't sound like the work of a man who wasn't bothered. The rift was now permanent. Keith would later claim in his memoir, Life, that he got his revenge by sleeping with Mick's girlfriend, Marianne Faithfull, in retaliation. The Glimmer Twins were fractured. 40 years later, when writing that same autobiography, Keith unleashed his still simmering fury on both the film, which he called a third-rate porn, and the man who betrayed him. The 50-Year Secret. For decades, the story of the performance affair remained a dark piece of Stones mythology. Mick Jagger, unsurprisingly, never spoke of it. Keith Richards, however, couldn't let it go. His autobiography laid his side of the story bare, confirming his belief and his all-too-human bitterness. But this was still just his word against a wall of silence. The story would have ended there, a classic he said, she said rock mystery, if not for what Pallenberg left behind. The most fascinating part of the mystery was Anita herself. While Keith fumed publicly in his book, Anita, who had split from Keith in 1980, flatly denied the story for her entire life. She was adamant. She brushed off the gossip, protecting her legacy and family. But she was sitting on a time bomb. When she died in 2017, her son, Marlon Richards, began sorting through her London apartment. He discovered a shoebox. Inside was a secret she had kept from everyone, a neatly typed, unpublished manuscript of her life, along with raw, unfiltered audio tapes. The material, which she had been recording in secret, would become the basis for the 2024 documentary Catching Fire, the story of Anita Pallenberg. In those tapes, she finally told the truth. Her son Marlon, who executive produced the film, describes the material as raw and emotional, revealing a deep self-loathing and expressions of shame and doubt that she never showed the world. And in her own words, read in the film by Scarlett Johansson, Pallenberg finally confirmed what Keith had suspected all along. The affair did happen. After 50 years, the secret was out. Her son Marlon, in promoting the film, finally acknowledged the, quote, fling with Mick Jagger on the set of Performance. To understand the power of that final confession, you have to understand the force of her decades-long denial. In a 2008 interview, she was asked about the rumors one last time. Quote, and no, she says, she didn't have an affair with Mick, despite all the gossip at the time. She never fancied him a patch on Keith. Now it's time to hear from you. Which was the most surprising part of this story? Let us know in the comments section below.